out there and on the internet, social media land. Ethan over here, Piano Tech Radio Hour. We're also going to let our live audience in the Zoom call in here right now. Hey everyone, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. Good to see you. Welcome back once again. Spotlight myself and my guest today. Excellent. Well, yeah, if you're out there on Facebook or YouTube, hello, hello. We're going to start our show here momentarily. I'd like to give a minute for people to get settled and also, get your bearings. This is a Zoom call that's being streamed live that we do every Saturday, and it's called Piano Tech Radio Hour. We will try to add a link out there if you're just checking us out on social media, Facebook, YouTube, so that you could jump in our Zoom call if you so choose. And we will get started momentarily. Just like to give us a minute to all get settled. We just initiated the Zoom call. We've got our live studio audience. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you. Hey, Terry. Great to have you on today. Thanks for joining, as well as Kevin and other folks I see out there in the audience, some regulars. Great to have you guys here. All right, I will momentarily introduce the show here, and we will get going. Let me just bring up my notes. This is, again, if you're just joining us, if you're for the first time, you're watching us on social media, this is Piano Tech Radio Hour, and we'll explain the situation here just about now. Welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. We gather every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world, including manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at, again, pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. Additionally, this program here, Piano Tech Radio Hour, it's a subset of what we do, a least expensive way to get involved at just $16 a month. If you join Piano Tech Radio Hour, you get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as the archival recordings of over 200 episodes in our member area. You can join by visiting bit.ly/joinptrh, bit.ly/joinptrh. And we always like to give a little bit of context up front about what else is going on. Of course, we have our podcast, pianotechradio.com. Check that out. We release these as audio-only episodes after initially recording them. You can also find some really cool written summaries and explanations of our private member area masterclasses from the vault through our blog. So that means we'll be covering some of the more advanced topics, voicing, could be some history of the action, or action geometry, or some topics that just are a little bit harder to learn about. We'll write blog posts about them to give you a taste. If you like what you see, you can jump in for the deeper content. That's at pianotechniciansmasterclass.substack.com. Make sure to check us out on our socials, of course, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Just Google our name, Piano Technicians Masterclasses, and you'll, along with the platform of your choice, and you'll find our page. All right, let's get started. Let's introduce our guest for today. His name is Rob Back. He's a multi-instrumentalist, producer, and engineer. He brings over 16 years of experience to the music industry, having begun his journey with the guitar, specializing in the recording and mixing process. Robert has honed his craft in commercial recording studios, where he developed both his technical engineering skills and a deep commitment to client services. His passion for learning and teaching led him to publish a best-selling book on recording arts in 2017. He is also the founder of Learn Audio Engineering, very appropriately titled, an engaged community of over 33,000 music lovers who share a passion for recording. Today, he continues to broaden his expertise into video production and marketing, empowering others to excel in the audio world. Bob, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Hi, Ethan. Thanks for having me.
And sorry, Rob. You don't do Bob. You do Rob or Robert, right?
Rob or Robert, whichever. Yeah,
Not Bob. I don't know why I said that.
it's okay.
It's Saturday. It's Saturday. You gotta get the juices flowing. I did have my
Yeah.
coffee. Um, well, let's get started here with just like a little bit of speaking about your journey. I would love to talk about pianos, of course, and
Mhm.
miking them and dealing with them in recording situations. But how did this all start, your musical journey and your musical life?
I mean, the shortest answer is it all started with a haircut.
Oh, I like that.
I was getting my haircut from somebody, and they asked me, I had expressed interest in the guitar, and they were like, I've got an extra one. I could teach you how to tune it.
Hmm,
And I kind of went from there. So, he taught me how to play Seven Nation Army, da 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 da. And
nice.
I kind of just the whole way home, I practiced playing that. And I remembered the tab in my head, and I kind of just went from there. I slowly taught myself how to play, and I always wanted to
And
play
you
in a
never
rock
cut
band.
your hair ever since. That's
No,
interesting.
I get little trims and stuff, but yeah, I honestly, it's been long since I've been an adult for sure. But yeah, that kind of let me down the road of learning music and teaching myself. And I was a big fan of like hair metal bands, obviously in the '80s, and that kind of led me back to bands like Led Zeppelin. And
Love it.
when I started listening to this stuff, my dad came up to me and was like, that's all based on blues, right? So I started
Mm,
to learn about people like John Lee Hooker, Howlin' Wolf, or Robert Johnson, and that also led me into jazz. And that's when I started to take guitar lessons. So my first guitar lesson, again, this is something my dad reminded me of when I told him I was going to be on this podcast, but I walked in there and the teacher was like, "Oh, let me guess, you want to learn to play metal?" And I was like, I actually want to learn to play jazz. And I just remember his face lighting up and being like, oh my goodness.
nice.
Like, I've been waiting for you for so long. But
Awesome.
like, so that's kind of the next chapter of my journey was learning to play jazz guitar in school.
Hmm.
And while I wouldn't really call myself a jazz guitar player, I just, it opens up so many avenues through appreciation of different voicings or sounds, as well as improvisation and
Mhm.
just kind of the ability to just try anything and to always work with people. I think is a really concrete concept of jazz music that's important and transcends into all other styles of music.
Yeah. Any favorite jazz guitarists?
Oh geez. I wrote a paper on Charlie Christian. I thought that he was
Okay.
really interesting. Um, I don't listen to a lot of jazz guitar, interestingly enough. Like Joe Pass or Django Reinhardt. Like there's,
Hmm.
um, yeah. But I
Are you familiar with
really
Pat Martino?
Pat Martino. I've heard the name. Yeah.
Check out Pat Martino. Really great guitar player. Kind of
Okay.
a little bit fusiony in his
Hmm.
later years, and um, but yeah, one of my favorite guitar players. So he actually has a very interesting story. He had some sort of maybe like a brain aneurysm or something went crazy with his brain at some point where he
Okay.
forgot to play the guitar entirely,
I
and he
think
was
I've
this
heard
like
about
really
this.
sick, badass guitar player. Plays like
Yeah.
awesome, fast, complicated licks and stuff. Completely forgot how to do it, and then he relearned and he listened to his own records to learn how to play the guitar again, to
That's
play
pretty cool.
like himself again. Yeah, interesting story, and also just a great guitar player.
Well,
Wonderful.
that's one of the beauties of recording, right? Is you always have that reference. So, even there's solos that I did that I'm like, how the heck did I play that? But you can always go back and transcribe your own work. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that makes sense.
So let's dive right into, we'll talk about a lot of other things. Let's talk about pianos a little bit.
Hmm.
What has been your experience with pianos, miking them, recording them? Any hot tips or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always fun to record a piano. It's not something that you get to do on the regular because, they're big and cumbersome and expensive and everything. But when you do, I've kind of learned that there's two correct ways to mic a piano. There's
Hmm.
a bunch of experimental stuff and if it sounds good, it is good and all that. But really, when it comes down to it, there's sort of a classical way of doing it and a more contemporary way of doing it. In the classical sense, you never want to go inside of the instrument. So you always want to think that the instrument kind of has this bubble around it, and you're going to place the microphones outside, kind of facing into the strings in the body of the instrument. So the way that I approach it is the low strings are always going to be left, the high strings are always going to be right. And really, what you're trying to achieve is a balance between the direct sound coming from the instrument and the room sound that the instrument is in, right? And that's sort of the invisible little sauce that a lot of people may not consider is the room in which you're recording in, that container which colors the sound in some way. Now, a lot of these classical recordings were recorded in like beautiful chambers with really high ceilings and a lot of ornate fixtures and stuff like that. And most of the time we don't really get to record in rooms like that. Sometimes they're much smaller or they're like a home piano space. So sometimes treatment helps, but I still do feel that for that classical or solo pianist vibe, really taking the microphones further away, as if you were a person standing in front of the piano, is going to get you the sound that you want.
Mm,
When you talk about more contemporary piano, usually the piano is accompanied by other instruments. So the goal then becomes getting that piano to actually cut through a denser mix. So there was an album that I did last year called Burnout by Lexine, and it featured a great pianist named Roman DeBrule from Vancouver. And he really came in last minute as a wild card, and we wanted him to play on the Rhodes and we wanted him to play on the clav. And there's a couple tunes where he was like, I think a grand is going to be great for this. And the way that we got that to cut through a dense mix of like drums and guitars and everything is we took the microphones and we put them closer over the hammers. So the one thing, again, low is left, high is right. And the one thing that you kind of want to finesse there is getting the microphones close to the hammers without getting the pedal sound to like be blowing air into the microphones. So sometimes it can take a little bit of finesse, but what you're really getting there is the attack and the punch of the strings that's or the hammers on the strings that's really going to get that sound to cut through. And there's another thing that you can do. It's a trick that Rudy Van Gelder would use on Blue Note Records. So it's old as time. It was used in a lot of jazz recordings, but it's actually taking a microphone and putting it against the soundboard. So against the side of the piano, you have these holes of like the body, and then below it you have the soundboard. And it's the soundboard that's actually resonating the instrument. So a lot of people think of the strings similar to the guitar, right? You think of the guitar strings as the thing that make the sound, but the guitar strings are only that minute kind of uh, first instance of sound vibration. It's actually them going through the bridge and going into the body of the instrument that creates that richness and all of the tone. So in the piano, by placing like a cloth or a scarf or something, and then you can just do like a 57, just literally touching the soundboard. I think for this recording, we actually used a 47 and we had it just a couple inches above the soundboard. But what that does is it gives you all of the body, the warmth, the fullness, the tone that really sits below the hammers. So you kind of get this similar to like a kick drum, how you might put like a mic inside and you get the sound of the beater hitting the skin. When you have a microphone outside, what it's really getting is that full wave development, all of that low end. So kind of between these two, you can balance how much body you want in the instrument and how much attack and actual placement that you get out of the instrument. And that's really important, especially when you have um, complex parts or really rhythmically intricate parts. It doesn't just sound like a blob of noise. You actually start to get those peaks and those transients of where those notes are actually placed on the grid.
mm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I definitely hadn't heard a lot of that before, so I appreciate you sharing it.
Absolutely.
Uh, Um, and I'd love to hear kind of like where your go-to sources of information are. I mean, I know you studied audio engineering, um, sort of formally. Um, Tell us about that process, right? I mean, with no, uh, uh, sorry, I don't want to characterize the institution that you studied
Yeah.
at, right? But
Yeah.
how was that experience, of studying formally in an
Yeah.
institutional setting versus kind of finding out things on your own and so forth?
I mean, the thing that people always say about like going to music school or whatever is you get
Hmm.
handed a lot of things and you're like, you will learn about this. And a lot
Hmm.
of people come out of it feeling like some of, if not much of the stuff that they learned isn't instantly transferable into the real world. Kind of
Mm,
my hot take is they help you to develop value. They do not teach you how to connect that to a market.
mm,
They do try with marketing classes and stuff like that, but again, a lot of the teachers that are doing this have been doing this for 30 years. Social media wasn't a thing in their day. They're able to get money from tenure. They don't have to hustle and get these gigs. And, most of them are relying on grant money or programs that are in the institution itself to actually record their products or their projects, sorry.
hmm
So I really find that you don't get an honest perspective of the industry as it is today. And you kind of, a lot of people who have shared to me that have gone through the school since that I've worked with, kind of this rude awakening of like, well, I'm a really good drummer, but I feel like I have to do something else to kind of get people to hire me or something like that. And that was similar to my experience where I came in and the first couple years were based around performance and learning your instrument and developing a proficiency. And the last couple years, you got to kind of develop a discipline or go into a major. And mine was recording, and that was where I really fell in love with the possibilities of recording and what's possible. It just it really blew my mind wide open, and I wanted more of it. And I started to approach studios for an internship opportunity, and I got a couple of them. And it was really great. It was really great getting to listen to producers from all around the world and how they approached music and how they solved problems and how they worked with artists. But eventually that kind of dried up because, you know, I don't live in LA or New York or Nashville, so there's not enough opportunities for them to have like a staff. You know what I mean? So it kind of is, if you can bring in your own clients, that's great. But we're not just going to pay you to hang around and get coffee. So I really felt that that was the skill, that was the golden ticket, was learning to market yourself, learning to communicate your value to clients. And ever since I started this journey with video, that is the thing that I've probably either 50-50 or even 60-40 have been working on. A lot of people will criticize people that are on YouTube for, oh, they're not out there and they're not doing the thing. And I would push back against that. And I would say those people are actually marketing themselves to be able to do the thing. That is
mm,
the place that people are going to find you is online, if not in the real world, going to shows and interfacing with artists face to face. A lot of the people that I've worked with have been from the States. I'm from Canada, and I have worked with some people in my city of Edmonton. But a lot of the mixes that I've done have come from people, in Anaheim or in Texas or in Nashville and stuff like that that have approached me. And sometimes it's just that the people in those areas are busy and are expensive. You know what I mean? And I'm still very much. It still feels like I'm on the beginning of my journey in very many ways, and in a sense, I still feel that struggle for artists and the struggles that they have as they're up and coming and as they're trying to figure this stuff out. Because as much as they want to invest in their art, it's really difficult to find a payoff in the way that streaming services are structured right now.
mm,
That it's really hard to really get a return on that investment, and a lot of them are hesitant to invest in their art as a result.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a story that we welcome here, and it is,
Mm-hmm.
and I've seen over again is, just especially people in the arts, creative pursuits,
Mm-hmm.
finding their own way in this modern soup of what it is to be a professional creator. You know,
Yes.
the stories are not as cut and dried as they used to be. Oh, I want to be an actor, I moved to Hollywood and
Mm-hmm.
strike it big or whatever. There's a lot around doing something online or coming up with some independent way or some unique way where you fill some sort of niche that maybe you never would have even thought of when you first
Yeah.
got started. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so are how often do you release your content on your channel when you do like YouTube content and things like that?
Either weekly or bi-weekly. Lately, I've been trying to do a lot more shorts. So I have about 200 videos on my channel, and there's a lot of good long form stuff there. But I've kind of been seeing that a lot of people don't necessarily have the time or the patience to sit through a 10 or 20-minute video. So kind of just taking that old content and finding, 1 minute of value, one little tip or trick that I can do, and then turning that into a short video or an Instagram reel or something like that. I've been seeing a lot of engagement and a lot more views from that. So that's been kind of my latest hustle, is to try and, wake up in the morning and make two shorts and then put those up and try and build out kind of, a consistent flow of videos while I work on my longer form videos for the future.
Mm.
But in
So tell
terms
me,
of the longer form videos, probably once a week or once every 2 weeks, something like that.
mhm. Let's talk more about your progress, your progression here
Hmm.
as a professional. So you started out with a haircut, learned to play the guitar. Then you went on to music school. Then you found your focus into the audio engineering world. At some point along the journey, you published a book. Of course, I've referenced the YouTube channel in the intro and just now, but we didn't really talk about how that all gets started. How did things progress once you kind of got out of the university, I suppose? That's when you ostensibly were
Hmm.
hoping that the career really starts to flourish. How did things
Yeah.
progress? How did you get to the point where you're producing a book and things like this?
Yeah, so when I was still an intern, I started to blog about my experience and either the sessions that I was working on or what I felt made a great intern. And the biggest advice that I can give is that in that scenario, it's not about you. You're not the one that got hired. You're not the one that the artist wanted to work with. You're basically there to zip it and to listen and to learn and to try and do everything you can to not interrupt the session, but just provide value to the session. So sometimes that's just closing the door after the artist, because they're not thinking about that, right? Turning off the air conditioner between takes, simple stuff like that. Everyone wants to come in and like instantly, I want to show you my Pro Tools workflow or whatever. But you have to realize that, yeah, the artist hired this other person, right? So I would just kind of take this as like, I would take all this stuff that I would learn, and I really wanted to have an outlet for it. So that's where the blog started. And as I was learning about this world and what it takes to be like an online person and an influencer, if you will, I wanted to write like a book, and that book was based off of my intro to recording class. There wasn't really a textbook for it or anything, and I found that a lot of people struggled with really, really basic concepts. It wasn't that they were hard, but it's just digital recording and trying to wrap your head around like, wait, sample rate, bit depth, which is, like there's just a lot of kind of confusing stuff. So I just wrote, I think it was under 100 pages, but it was just really laying out all of these simple terms and like polar patterns and condenser microphone, dynamic microphone, and just really basic stuff. And it went number one on Amazon. And I would brag about that, but the truth is that I kind of manufactured that success, and that I priced it competitively, and I told everyone about it. Like I was like, on this day, I want you to buy this book, and it was just a fact of so many of the people that I knew bought that book on one day that it was the best selling book. And I grab a screenshot, boom, best selling author, right? So, that was a really early win that I had. Another thing that I did really early on was my first video actually that I did for Christmas. I got Sylvia Massey's book, Recording Unhinged. So she recorded for System of a Down, Tool. I think she recorded Johnny Cash for Rick Rubin. So just a great audio engineer, but she's also someone who really likes to think outside of the box, sometimes absurdly. But she had this page in the book where she talks about making a patina for cymbals. So where a lot of drummers would put like a what do you call them? The little moon gel
Yes.
or tape sometimes to like reduce the sustain or the decay of cymbals, which is something
Mhm.
I would recommend. I
Mhm.
did this other thing, which I think made a really good YouTube video, which was taking vinegar, coffee grounds, and potato chips and putting them in a blender and then smearing them on one of my friend's cymbals. And, like, bless him for letting me do that. I wouldn't recommend it. But I made a video about this and like, this is how the cymbal sounds before. This is the process. This is how it sounds after. And I made a little track surrounding that. And I sent it to her and she loved it. And she shared it on her socials, right? And there was people that, followed her that were like, "Hey, I'm going to follow this guy." So I got a really early boost of maybe 40 to 80 subscribers or something. But for my first video, I was sort of like, "Oh, this is awesome." But the way I approached it was like, I'm nobody. Who's going to care about my opinions? But I can talk about other people, other people that are already doing this, and try what they're doing, kind of as an experiment. And I found that was a way to kind of get over the hump of like, look at me. It's like, let's try what's going on already. Let's try what this person's doing.
Hmm.
So, for a while, I talked about the way other people approached music, the way Derek Ali and Dr. Dre would approach mixing in mono and things like that. And that sort of started to progress until I got a little bit bigger and a little bit more confident. And I made a big leap in 2019 because I went to Germany and I got to tour the Sennheiser Neumann factory and learn how they make different microphones and their history. And it was just like, it was an amazing experience.
Hmm.
And then
How long
right
were you
after,
there?
I was there for about a month. So I spent a lot of time in Berlin, but I also went to Bissendorf, which is close to Hanover, which is where their factory is. So it's a very, I don't know, it was just a wild experience. Part of it is very futuristic, but part of it looks very old fashioned, like German architecture. So it was wild. They had retrofitted one of the doors to be like you would walk up to it and it would just magically open and like I don't know. It was wild. I got to try the world's most expensive headphones there. They're Orpheus headphones they call them. So yeah, it was such a treat to kind of see how they went from being a contractor for the German government to making things for the private sector and finally taking a whole consumer division, which is what a lot of people today know them for. But they have a whole side of their practice that nobody can afford, and that's sort of like the headphones. Like I think Elon Musk was the first person to buy a pair. They're ridiculously expensive, but their their pursuit is on perfect sound. So in a way, they have to balance between what the consumers can afford and what things like government and big business want, right? So I thought that was a really interesting take on it.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds fascinating. You reminded me of a couple of things. I was recently in California, and I
Mm-hmm.
was visiting with one of our audience members as well as who's been an instructor. His name's Larry Lobel, and he lives in the San Francisco area, and he kind of took me on a tour of some interesting things around there. Two of them I've thought of, which I don't think we've shared either of these yet. I do have some material that I'll probably share on the show later on. One, we went to this place called Reference Recordings in Pacifica, California.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked to this older gentleman, I can't think of his name, but it was fascinating to hear him talk about his history in the recording space. So
Mm-hmm.
he was literally one of these guys that helped, decide on the engineering for microphones, right?
Yeah.
And, would take there was a story they had of taking a microphone that was some sort of a trial microphone that he got from someone at one of these companies, Sennheiser or Shure or something like that. And the type of guy that could take that and then modify it and make this sort of magical microphone that nobody else really had, stuff like
Yeah.
that. And he talked a lot in a very interesting way about recreating physical space using recording and speakers, right? So
Right.
recording in such a way so that if you just with like I think what he said, just like two mics, right, in a room, and you have and having also speakers that can handle this. You have the violin player over here, the guitar player over here, and then when you listen to it and you have the two speakers, you can hear it as though you're locating the various folks of the
Mm-hmm.
of the ensemble in the space, in the actual
Mm-hmm.
space. Very interesting stuff around the engineering technology and the way the waves overlap with each other, and it's a very fascinating world.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the birth of stereo is they wanted I think it was Alan Blumlein who he would go to a like a theater performance or like a talkie or whatever, and wherever the person would move on stage, the sound would stay still. And he said, well, that shouldn't be. If the person moves to the right, the sound should move with them.
Mm,
And that's where like the birth of stereo kind of came from, and the idea that if you had, you know, several speakers on stage and you had various instruments and microphones, that wherever that sound would come from, it would be reproduced by the speaker that was closest to it. And they kind of they reduced that down to the two speakers of stereo that we have today, and
mm.
they use kind of just balancing the volume between the left and the right to place things in different locations in the soundscape. It's a really cool technology, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that was reference recordings in Pacifica. And
Mm.
then the other things that you made me think of is we got to go to Skywalker Sound. Are you familiar with Skywalker Sound?
Yes, yeah, George
Yeah.
Lucas.
George Lucas has these studios. It's kind of out in the middle of the mountains. You wouldn't
Hmm.
expect anything but a cabin out in the wilderness or something. And then you drive down a long driveway, and then there's this like expand these giant,
Yeah.
beautiful buildings that are all, classed up with the highest technology and engineering and all this stuff. And you walk inside, and they have a huge sound studio, which they probably built and designed like, you know, 40 years ago, to be honest. But it was state of the art even back then. So it's
Hmm.
still like the way that they designed it from scratch, left, both original sort of engineering and architecture that is still amazing, but also the room to kind of implement new things. And they
Hmm.
had, you were talking about miking up close versus miking farther away when you were talking about miking the piano. So
Hmm.
they actually, I don't know if you've probably come across this yourself, but I'm sure our audience hasn't heard much of it. They have this, I think you would call it sound baffling, right? Or like
Yep.
sort of sound sheets, right? On wheels, but they
Yes.
have a big room. So you could have a piano and you put these baffles around it, but you leave sort of the higher part open,
Hmm.
and then you could mic within those baffles, so you get the
Hmm.
close sound of the instrument. You can mic outside of it and you get the room sound, and then you could decide, which one of those you want to use and how you want to mix it. I thought that was
Hmm.
very cool to see how they do that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes they call those gobos, that they're like these movable baffles. I know Abbey Road Studios, I think it is, that they have on the walls, you can flip them from being either a reflective surface or an absorptive surface, kind of similar to what
Mm,
you were talking about. So
yeah.
you can really tune the room to the size and the amount of ambience that you want. And of course, if you don't have something like that, you can use those gobos or something to kind of surround the performer to kind of get rid of some of the room and make it a little bit more intimate. So yeah, it's really cool how you can treat spaces for recording. That's something that I really enjoy,
Yeah,
and I
that
made
is
a lot of
another thing
videos
that
about acoustic
they
treatment.
had on the walls, these giant walls,
Hmm.
50 feet tall. I don't know. They're very, very tall ceilings.
Yeah.
And they had these rotating panels. So they could actually, they're sort of aligned next to each other, right? So you could
Yeah.
change exactly how the sound was reflected. And maybe, I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, maybe it's got a different reflective versus absorptive surface on either side.
Hmm.
Very cool technology. Um, I've got a question here from one of our audience members, Terry Chamberlain. Um,
Perfect.
See if you've got an interesting answer. He says, "How does Atmos fit into your production process? Have you ever worked with Atmos?"
The short answer is no. The long answer is you would need quite a room and quite a budget to afford that many speakers. So the way that I understood it is the minimum Atmos setup would be, so right here I have left and right, kind of the stereo setup that I was talking about before. If
Hmm.
you were to approach an Atmos setup, the first is to have the surround, right? So we have something like, originally we had something like called like 5.1 or 7.1, and the first number means the number of speakers that you have. So right here I have two speakers. You would have one in the center, being a dedicated center channel. So in stereo, if a sound is equal in left and right, it shows up as what we call a phantom center. So it
Hmm.
appears to be in the center. In Atmos, they introduce a center channel. So sometimes they call that LCR, for
Hmm.
left, center, and right.
Mm.
Um, the next step is to have surround speakers. So having a minimum of two speakers that are actually behind the mix position. So they'd be over here. And what that gives you is you get your your forefront of sound, which would be all your main elements, and you have your ambience and your sort of auxiliary or textural elements that would show up almost behind you, right? Our ears aren't as sensitive, back here. They're more
Hmm.
sensitive. They're tuned for the front, right?
Hmm.
So you can put things like delays or reverbs or little kind of ear candy back there. Um, then we have the point one. So the point one means a subwoofer or a low frequency effects channel. So if you had a subwoofer in this room with these two speakers, it would be known as a 2.1
Hmm.
setup. And that's just all surround sound that's been around forever, or for quite a while. Where Dolby Atmos comes in is it adds in a layer of height. So there's a Z axis as well.
Hmm.
So the minimum that you would need is two speakers actually above your mix position. And again, that would give you a little bit of height, or again, like you have this axis that you could play with. Now you have this axis that you could play with. And
Hmm.
I think that I thought that the minimum to get into Dolby Atmos would be five speakers around you, a sub, and two speakers above you. But I've been told that Dolby actually wants you to have seven speakers around you, four speakers above you,
Hmm.
and the subwoofer. So
Whoa.
typically, what you would do is you would have. I know a guy that I've interviewed, Serge Courtois, from Germany. He talked a little bit about his Atmos setup on my channel, and he had, I believe, three main speakers that were bigger, and then all of his other surround speakers were smaller Genelec speakers. And really, the interesting thing comes from taking a stereo mix and putting it into an Atmos mix. And it sounds really interesting. Whoa, we've got all this space and stuff that we can play with. But really, because it has to translate to that stereo mix, that if someone's listening like on AirPods or something, they've got their stereo mix. Hey, I want to try listening to it in Atmos. Let's
Hmm.
put that on. It can't wildly change. It
Hmm.
has to just be sort of a more immersive version of that stereo mix. So what
Hmm.
he was talking about was that if you have, a guitar panned to the left, you have a hi-hat panned to the right, you have to still do that in your stereo mix. You don't get unlimited freedom. You kind of have to start by recreating that stereo mix. And you do have a little bit of space with things like reverb, with delay, with like background vocals and stuff, maybe things that aren't as, you know, a core focus for the mix or the song itself. That's where you get to kind of play with your extra speakers. But typically, I know a lot of people really think that it's amazing, and I haven't sat in an Atmos setup, so I can't really give you my opinion on that. But it really does seem like they're trying to create some sort of benchmark that's above stereo. That like there is a lot of work these days to get Atmos mixes, because I believe it's Apple Music that in order to get on their editorial playlists, you need to have your mix done in Atmos, and it's
Hmm.
sort of an extra thing that you would have to do after the stereo mix. And just thinking of how many speakers you would need and how much that would cost and how much room, and then configuring it all together and getting the Dolby renderer and everything, it really, really does add up. And you have to ask, like, how much extra value does that have to the listener, and what listener is going to be able to really enjoy that Atmos setup in their own home? You know what I mean? Like, I have heard that AirPods do have an Atmos function, but I don't know how similar that really is to a true like speaker Atmos setup.
Hmm.
So in a way, I kind of feel like it's a gimmick, but I'm also, I'd probably not be the one to make a definitive statement on that.
Terry,
So
are you equipped with an Atmos system?
no,
No,
no, no.
no.
But I've heard mixes that were done after the
Yeah.
recording sessions were done, and it doesn't really work for small ensembles. It works for large orchestral
Yes.
works that have been remixed.
Yeah.
And so yeah, limited probably usage for small groups.
Hmm. I agree.
Thanks for bringing that in, though. Yeah. And that's certainly the type of thing that they're going to work on over there at
Hmm.
Skywalker Sound where we were.
Yeah. Oh, for video games, for film, like it
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense if you think about it, right? If you're wearing
Right.
headphones and you want to hear that, an enemy's behind you, or
Hmm.
you want someone that's walking up or something like that, it makes total sense. For
Hmm.
music, it starts to get a little like, well, I guess in this case you could or something like that. But,
Yeah.
for a rock band or something like that, I don't see it as being necessary.
Hmm. That's interesting to know it's a tool that's available.
Mm,
I've brought this up quite often on the program. I see these patterns as we talk to different people in different domains, and I'll bring this up often at this point now. But a theme that I've seen with people who are very skilled at what they do is they pay attention to details that others may think are not even important. Like a piano tuner, um, like a great piano tuner is going to pay attention to, and this is maybe even more obvious to the piano tuners than some of the even finer details, but they're going to pay attention to the height of the strings.
mm,
Like you would adjust it a little bit so that when the hammer strikes the string, does it strike them evenly or not? And that makes a
right.
difference, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you were just coming into this and you say, well, I just need to tune the piano. What do you mean? You're leveling the strings so that they hit the hammer in the right way? You're like, does that even matter? Forget about it, right?
Hmm.
But that's what I think of when I think about the sort of possibilities of these systems of surround and things like that. Of course, the real nerds are going to care about it and it's going to matter, if you truly
Hmm.
care. But then there's also a level at which it's inaccessible to the folks that aren't gonna have the budget for it or the taste for it as well,
Hmm.
as you mentioned. Um, so that's an interesting journey. So you start out with your haircut, you get the guitar going, you go to school, become into the engineering space. You've written the book, kind of had a nice response to that. And then you're getting into creating the videos. Have you thought about publishing more? What's your do you have a long-term vision as this all grows? You're doing some recording clearly, just like as a gig, doing and engineering for folks. You're doing the online stuff, the educational stuff, the publishing. Where does it grow from here? Do you have a longer vision?
Really, it's trying to provide more for artists. So
Mm.
I really see the other studios that are doing work as kind of, they come in and they record your stuff beautifully, and then it's sort of like, okay, bye bye. Maybe we'll take a picture on Instagram or something like that. I really want to connect artists with opportunities and kind of solve that problem of, well, I want to invest in my art, but what is it going to do for me?
Mm.
I've had a couple of people when I have that kind of client discovery call with them, they kind of ask me like, look, is this going to make me famous? Not in those words, but it's sort of like, can you connect me with people and stuff like that?
Mhm.
And while like, that's a long, long road. Through my work in video and interviewing and maybe eventually doing like a podcast or something like that, I
Mhm.
really want to be able to spotlight artists and
Mhm.
amplify their journey in that way, in addition to the recording. Because I find that a lot of people, they might spend or they might save up to spend on that dream recording session, and then they're like, well, nobody listened to my music, and then they get a little
Mhm.
jaded, and then, wow, that was a scam, I'm not going to pay for that next time.
Mm.
But it really is a follow through of creating great music and figuring out how you're going to get it in front of people and how
Sure.
you're going to make people care about the art that you're creating.
Mm.
And so much of what I've heard artists say is that, they have a message to their music, and sometimes the music itself doesn't clearly exactly communicate that message, that they want to talk about it and they want to explore those themes a little bit more to let people know what they're all about and what's going on in their lives. So really where that started for me was in 2021. um, you know right before COVID, I'd gone to Germany. I actually got to visit LA, and I really felt like my career was really taking off, and there was all these opportunities opening up. And then COVID hit, and everything kind of shut down, and everyone was sad for a little bit. And like, I really had to think about, what am I gonna do? What can I do? What can I offer? And I kind of had to play around in my own backyard and figure out, you know, who's been doing this. So I did uh, this interview series called Local Leaders, and it was about the evolution of the recording studio from from the past to how it is now. And I got to interview a number of people in Western Canada, one of which was Dave Thomas, who runs Advanced Audio Microphones. It's Canada's only microphone manufacturer. And he does similar to what you were talking about, someone who was incredibly gifted in electronics design and was able to take those designs and retrofit them for modern components, or realize, oh, there's like a flaw here, like there's a bit of a peak at 10K, we can take that out, we can take a 414, we can give it more headroom or something like that. And he sells these microphones at about a tenth of the price that you would get a Neumann or an AKG microphone. And he uses designs that are based off of the original versions rather than the ones that have been kind of dumbed down through the years and have been machine manufactured.
Mm.
I also got to visit the Rolling Stones mobile studio, which oddly enough lives in Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Mm.
So this is the first mobile recording studio in Europe. And it was really awesome to see the place where all of these great recordings, Led Zeppelin, Bob Marley, the Rolling Stones, would happen, and how nowadays all of that technology basically can fit on your desktop, right? You can have an interface, you can have a set of speakers, and as long as you have a power supply, you can go anywhere and you can record.
Hmm.
But in the 60s and the 70s, they needed this whole truck and a power supply and all of this gear to be able to go to a live concert and to be able to record it like that. So it was really cool to see the evolution of that technology. We also met with the head of recording at the university that I went with, and a graduate of that class that had gone on to create a successful recording studio business. So we really wanted to go way back to, like, how things used to be, and how they can be brought into the future, and how the recording studio used to look versus what recording education is today, and how to make a business out of it, or follow through to make it a career. So
Hmm.
that was really interesting for me. And in addition to just being kind of like content and being my own journey of learning, it also was a means to amplify these people that might be so busy doing their craft that they're not really going to get their story told in a way. So I did that in 2021. And just now this year, I've been making shorts from those interviews, those clips. And like the long form video might get 2,000 views if it's lucky, but some of these shorter clips have gotten hundreds of thousands of views on Instagram. And
Hmm.
it just, a lot of the stories people have really been resonating with. There was a story where Dave Thomas met his wife at Led Zeppelin's first concert in Canada. He was an amp tech, and he retrofitted their amps for Canadian or North American plugs from the British plugs. And his wife went to go get, or his now wife, she went to go get them burgers for working through their lunch. And I guess Robert Plant went to go take one of the burgers, and she like slapped his hand, and it was love at first sight from that point. So it
Nice.
just really ridiculous kind of stories that you hear talking to these old guys that have been doing it for so long. So that's
Cool.
something that I want to do, pivoting to like up and coming artists, is just learning more about their journey, about what they value in their art, and giving them a platform to be able to do that, and using the audience and the channel that I've developed to give them more eyeballs, and to make people notice, hey, you should really check these people out if you like that style of music.
Yeah, there's a lot of underexposed, talented folks out there these days for sure.
Mhm.
Um, I've got another question here from Terry.
Perfect.
Uh, what's your go-to recording software? Or can you talk a little bit more about the software that you use and how you apply it?
I'm a Pro Tools guy. I love using it when it works. Um, I'm not a big fan of Avid, and I'm not a big fan of it when it doesn't work. If anyone was to tell me I don't want to use Pro Tools, I would say, yeah, I get that. I also love using Logic, and I started using GarageBand. Eventually I got Logic, and I think for music production, for composition, and things like that. I think Logic is a great tool. It is a Mac only tool, but I really feel that it has everything you need to get started and to create music, and it really is like a wonderful software. I also find that it is very stable, which is the thing that's most important to me. Pro Tools, I love the layout of it. I love the workflow of it. I love playlisting in it. But sometimes when it doesn't want to work, it just makes you want to pull your hair out. I also recognize that it is incredibly expensive. I'm very blessed to have a perpetual license in Pro Tools that I don't have to pay for it every year, but it has sadly become software as a service. It is very expensive, and there's also an additional subscription for support for that software. So I love Pro Tools, but I'm not a big fan of Avid. If that, so that would be my answer. I've also I know a lot of people that have had great success with Reaper, and have said, you know, if you really like working in Pro Tools, you can use Reaper, and you can basically make it have a skin of Pro Tools or whatever. You can reskin it to look like Pro Tools and to act in the same way. It's very customizable. So I would say that would probably be my recommendation for someone who's a Windows user who doesn't have access to Logic. Um, but yeah, for me, like for recording and for mixing, just the workflow and the way that I have everything set up, I love using Pro Tools. It's what feels comfortable for me.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Um, in terms of, I'm sure that's kind of one of the things that you share about in your channel is kind of just the ins and outs of the recording process. You know, how to use specific
Mm-hmm.
plugins or techniques or things like
Yep.
that. What's an example of what's been kind of popular? Is it kind of the basics? I'm assuming the basics are often very popular just because there's so many more people who want to know the basics, right? And then you get into
Well,
more intricate stuff, there's probably less of an audience. But yeah, what's
you've got
popular?
that. You've got that right. A lot of the more complicated stuff that I've tried to do, sometimes there isn't really like an audience for it.
Hmm.
And also just with stuff with Pro Tools, as I've said, it's kind of less accessible. So I've done things in Pro Tools and I don't get a lot of views, and then I'll do something in Logic and I will get a lot of views. So it's kind of similar to like I was a teacher for a while. I taught guitar and ukulele and drums and stuff like that. And everyone has to buy book one, but
Hmm.
less and less people progress to every other
Hmm.
level, right? So if you're teaching at a grade 9 level or something, let's say, your audience is much more limited. Whereas if you have, more beginner friendly stuff, it's more accessible, it gets more eyeballs, and everyone has to progress through that portion. What's
Hmm.
really strange is sometimes it's very, very mundane things that really do blow up. For
Hmm.
example, um, I was talking a bit about advanced audio and their versions of microphones. I'm using a version of a RE20 here called a DM20, and I did a shootout between their SM7 version, the DM7, and a Shure model of that. So I talked about the differences, and I did some recording and like, hey, what do you think the difference is, right? And that got 1,000 views or something, right? And then I did another one where I talked about, get this, how to remove the foam from an SM7, like 14,000 views.
Hmm.
And that, like, if you told someone you were going to make a video on that, they're like, well, that isn't cool, that isn't sexy, that's not
Hmm.
exciting.
Hmm.
But imagine you buy that microphone used, and it's expensive and you don't want to hurt it, and you're
Hmm.
trying, oh, I don't, oh my god, am I going to rip this,
Right.
right? But if you have someone just like, no, you put your fingernail right here, and people are going to look for that. So in a
Hmm.
way, you can kind of use Google as a search engine and think like, what are people going to want to know? What are they going to search for? Sometimes it's things that I find that should be intuitive but aren't.
Hmm.
There's a lot of things with Logic that I've struggled with. One of them was like getting rid of a bus. So you have an auxiliary track for your reverb or something, and sometimes when you create a session, it gives you like four of them. And you're like, well,
Hmm.
I don't need these or something, right? Right. But you can't get them to go away. They're always there in the session. So I figured out how to actually get rid of them, and I made a video on it. So if you think of how to create and use a bus in Logic versus how to delete a bus in Logic, the difference in engagement is like 10 to 1.
Hmm.
you know it's wild, but sometimes I've had to approach, thinking about the positive, or like what is the result you're going to get, right? How to create a bus to um use less CPU or make your sessions work faster versus how to remove something or how to not do something. And sometimes it's the not, or it's the
Mm,
avoiding the
sure.
problem where you get 10 times more engagement. So I would say
Hmm.
you're very right in that simple concepts that people are gonna, what is the difference between mono versus stereo? If I want like a stereo effect on my voice, do I set up two microphones and like do this or something?
Hmm.
The answer is no, but everyone, like, there's going to be a lot more people that have those questions versus something that's much more intricate, or like talking about a bunch of like stereo drum techniques, or getting really down into the nitty gritties of the math and the physics of it.
Hmm.
Fewer people will make it that far in the journey,
Yeah,
and
that
and
makes
kind
a
of
lot of sense.
my structure on this is that I'm trying to reach the people at the beginning of their journey and offering my own expertise and services and being available through them through meetings and stuff like that. That if they want to learn more, I'm available to help them with that journey.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, we are close to the end of the hour here. We like to keep it pretty tight. Before we roll out, would love to make sure people know how to find you and follow you and get the most out of what you offer. Where would you send people to continue on their journey?
Well, my studio is called Backburner Studios. You can check it out, backburnerstudios.ca. My YouTube channel is called Learn Audio Engineering. There may come a time where I switch it over to just be Backburner Studios, but for right now, yeah, learnaudioengineering.com or backburnerstudios.ca. You can come contact me there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. You've been gracious to
Thanks,
join us.
Ethan. Absolutely.
I will outro us here. We have reached the end of another musical journey. Oh, quick question before I do that.
Perfect.
Terry said, "What are the titles of your book or books that people can buy?"
My book is called How to Record Anything with Clarity and Character by Robert Back.
Hmm. Cicadas. I'm trying to think of what anything could be.
Oh man, I recorded there was a song I did, Patience by Lexine, off the
Yeah,
the Burnout album that I talked
yeah.
about, and it's a bossa tune with
Uh-huh.
R&B, so we call it rhythm and bossa. And for the
Nice.
outro, we wanted that really calm, sitting on the beach, there's waves. We got the drummer to make waves with
Mm,
brushes on the snare. And I went outside at night and I recorded a cricket.
nice.
So you got that nice kind of, the crickets at the end of the evening. So like, you can record anything.
I love it. That's
Yeah,
a great title. You're definitely good at titles. I
thank you.
can tell that. Learn audio engineering. You got to be right to the point, and that's how you get people, right? You get them exactly
Absolutely.
what they need.
Yeah,
All right, as I said, we've reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks again to Rob Back for joining us, as well as our live audience, including the very inquisitive and engaging Terry Chamberlain. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. For those of you that joined us today by signing up for this session individually, you can make your life more convenient. Subscribe to Piano Tech Radio Hour, just 16 bucks a month. You get the recording of today's session in a member area, as well as automatic registration for each week's new session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH. That's bit.ly/join PTRH. Don't forget about the podcast at pianotechradio.com, the Substack with our blog, giving you some of our private member area content in blogging form, and our social medias, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We'll see you out there on the socials. Thank you very much. Rob, if you want, we'll end this session if you want to jump right back on and we'll do a little wrap up, just you and me, but we'll end it
perfect.
right now. Thanks, everyone.